Yesterday, when I had the chance to kick off the storytelling session, I mentioned how, as a storyteller, if you don't grab the person or the audience in the first paragraph, you're going to lose them and they won't be there at the end of the story. So hopefully, I mean, I know we kicked it off with Mike Westerson, and I know he grabbed your attention. Hopefully we kept your attention for 2 days. We are almost at the end. We're at the last paragraph now. So I put together this panel of New York-based designers who I know to take risks. I've actually worked with Marla, and I've known Joel and Jason's work for a while. And it's interesting that they're all designers, but they all come from a different discipline, if you will. Jason is a producer, artistic director. Joel does sound design. Marla does scenery design and staging. And so, well, if I could sew costumes, we could put a show on, but we're not going to do that. So let me introduce who these people are. Josh Eagan, artistic director for Ars Nova. Ars Nova is an incredible organization. Over the years, one of the biggest risks that I've seen in everything that I've done is about people. It's about casting for a project. Do you have the right talent? Are the vendors going to deliver on time? Are you dealing with sketchy clients? It's all about people. And Josh kind of takes this head on. He nurtures and mentors young, emerging talent in the theater. Writers, actors, comedians, musicians, they all kind of come under Josh. He mentors them, gives them a place to perform, gives them direction, and hopefully they all can go on to do great things later. If you look at that bottom picture there in the center, that is Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Baby Lin-Manuel Miranda.
So whatever happened to him? He went on to do some pretty good stuff. So he actually now uses Ars Nova as one of his playgrounds, proving grounds. He does experimental stuff there. And so hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about that later. One other thing about Josh. He has a show, he has a show opening on Broadway in 4 days. So what are you doing here? This was a show that opened up in a 99-seat theater, won a Drama Desk Award, and now you're retooling it or bringing it onto Broadway. Previews start in 4 days.
Yep.
Great. I want to talk about those risks when we get into it. Well, thank you for being here. Joel Bekerman is the founder of a company called Man-Made Music. When I think about music, I think, okay, background music, sound effects, all that. The work that Joel does is more about the experience that the music brings, not just the emotion, but getting music to make us do things. I want to read something interesting here about Joel. Details magazine said, Joel is hailed as equal parts Philip Glass and Don Draper. Is that a compliment?
I'm not sure.
Well, in addition to all of that stuff he does with sound, he's also an author, and he wrote a book called The Sonic Boom: How Sound Transforms the Way We Think, Feel, and Buy. He was also named by Fast Company magazine as one of the most creative people in business. So congratulations on all of that. And so we're going to hear a little bit more about sound and how it makes us feel and all that. Well, Roy Disney famously said, brands are for cows. And of course, I don't think any of us believe that. But when you think of a brand, what do you think of? When you think of how that brand is shown to the audience, do you think it's a color, Ferrari red? Is it a logo? Is it a 5-foot mouse? Brands kind of are shown in different ways. One of the many things that Joel does brand identification using audio. So we're going to play a game here called Name That Tune. All right? Let's see if this works. Guesses? I'm sorry you didn't answer in the form of a question. Yes, correct. HBO. Let's go number 2. NFL, that's right. NFL Super Bowl.
NFL on NBC.
Hey.
Every network actually has its own theme. That's
Wow.
the NFL and NBC.
Oh.
So if you watch the Sunday night games, that's what you're familiar with.
Okay. And now let's go to the last one. Go ahead, Joe.
Close.
AT&T. AT&T. All of those signature sounds were created by Joel and his company, among hundreds of others, I'm guessing. Lots of television shows. One of my favorites, Anthony Bourdain's No Reservations, is such a signature piece of music. And so we'll get into a little bit more of that as we go. And our last panelist today is a woman I actually worked with several years ago. How many of you know John DeSantis? Anybody know John DeSantis? John DeSantis is a producer. He was with Disney for a while when I was with Disney. And John is old style. John grew up in the rock and roll industry. He actually produced some large, very, very large rock music festivals. And John is from Philadelphia, and he sounds like he just came off the set of Goodfellas. So one day I had my own company, and I got a phone call from John. And John says, hey, Paul, how you doing? He's like, I'm okay, John. He said, hey, listen, you're going to get a call from a guy named Winky. What? You're going to get a call from a guy named Winky. You're going to get a call from a guy named Winky. Just tell him that I talked to you. Okay, fine. Sure enough, a couple hours later, I got a call from a guy named Winky. And it was very hard to hear Winky because he was in Rome, and he happened to be in a rehearsal studio with Pink Floyd. And so I talked to Winky, and he said he has a client, and they want to do a Madame Leota type effect. The client was very fond of Disney, and they wanted to do some kind of effect for a stage show. I came to find out it was for Lady Gaga. So after several pre-meetings, we eventually came to New York, where I got to meet Marla. And with all of these great ideas flowing around, there was this person of calm sitting at the end of the table that you knew that she was going to figure out how to get all of this created and done. And so there was a great collaboration. We had a great time working on that project. And hopefully we can talk a little bit about some of the clients you've worked with, some that may push you, or maybe you're pushing them. We'll find out. Marla's design goes across a pretty good breadth of what she does. She does a lot of things like, this is a haute couture she did. She did some rock and roll work. She did some things for home and garden. You did some mock-up homes for different music genres. And of course, what I know you for is your stage and concert design. And this is some images from the Gaga tour that we got to work on. And there's the little Madame Leota head up in the top there, my contribution. And then she's also, of course, as I mentioned, she's done a lot of work for a lot of famous people. And I got to know her on her Gaga work. And here's a designer that actually draws some drawings and then some of the visualization of what's going on. So it's really fun to have this talented group. And I'm going to start off. It will just be a question and answer period for the audience, but I want to start it off a little bit. And I want you to talk to me about, well, let's start here. You got a show opening, previews in 4 days. What is the thing that's keeping you up at night? What's the biggest risk you have going forward?
Good question. So this show, Great Comet, started at my space, Ars Nova, which is a 99-seat jewel box theater. It's a completely immersive Russian supper club show where the performers are integrated with the audience, and there are dumplings on the table and vodka, and it's quite an experience. And so one of the largest risks has been in scaling it up, how we incrementally discover the new risks we're taking and meet those challenges. So I think after the Ars Nova run, we moved it to a tent, which we erected in the West Village of Manhattan, and recreated the Ars Nova production inside of a tent, actually adding a full restaurant and bar as well. And then it's had a regional production at ART in Cambridge to explore how we translated the same Ars Nova production and design into a proscenium theater, but keeping the immersive nature. So getting to your question, I think seeing how it now transforms into the largest space it's ever been in, but keeps the intimacy that made it so successful in the first place has been on my mind a great deal. And I think the design has done a great job of trying to meet those challenges, but until we have people in the room, it's going to be hard to see where the problem spots are.
So you went from 99 seats to how big is the house now?
Now we're at about 1,400. So at Ars Nova, I mean, people were sitting in your lap, basically. And here, it's going into the Imperial Theater, which is where Les Miserables was just playing. So that gives you a sense of the scale. And we've actually, with the help of the Schubert organization, who owns the theater, reconfigured the theater pretty massively and built a stage out over most of the orchestra, removed tons of seats to put that seating on stage to sort of create that intimate Ars Nova feeling with audience seated on stage. And then as a way of incorporating everyone, we've added grand staircases up both sides of the theater alongside the boxes that connect the actual theater stage to the rear mezzanine. And the performers are moving through the entire space for the entire production. So the cast at Ars Nova was about 12, and now we're at about 35.
Wow.
So that no matter where you are in the space, there's always someone near you. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but what's keeping me up at night, or where do all
Sense of
these people
scale.
go, and how do they not die?
All right.
Dying would be bad.
Marla, you've worked with some high-profile clients that sometimes are on the edge of the artistic world. Do you find yourself pushing the envelope more than they, or do they help you push the envelope? Where does the avant-gardeness of what you do come from?
I think it's a combination. I think people come to me in the first place for my deep background. I've had the privilege, my first set design collaboration was with Richard Avedon for doing high fashion campaigns with Versace. So I kind of started very artistically, but I also got used to being in a room with people who were really talented and artistic and quirky and wanted me to be as good as they were. So they lifted me up. And after my years of experience, I feel I can do that same thing for younger artists. So in the case of a Lady Gaga, she's so creative, but she's pretty busy, so it's hard for her to really, do every single thing herself. So she has to find people she trusts to carry on her vision and push it. So I find that when I come to her with things that are pushing it but still so true to her, she'll always go for it. And that's the same with whether I'm working for a Versace or a Target. You have to know who your audience is and elevate it in a way that they can understand and accept. So I would say, having worked with a lot of artists over the years, from David Bowie, Prince, rest in peace, to Beyonce and Taylor Swift and Madonna, it's, some of them are more into the visual than others, but most of the ones I mentioned are very visual, and the things they're interested in, it's great. I get to do the research and come up with ideas of things that can be possibly made in the time frame. And also, depending on the application, like that castle you saw had to be taken apart and put together and toured all over the world a few times. So it's understanding everything from the storytelling aspect, the aesthetics, to then the mechanicals.
Right. I'm going to continue with that thought. Joel, when you meet a new client, you obviously have a lot of corporate clients. Do you assess their tolerance for risk before you start working with them?
Very, very much so. I mean, my background is in entertainment. Really, we've got about 14 television shows on the air, and you mentioned Bourdain, which is certainly one of my favorites that we worked on, but we work on a lot of television and a lot of working with the Academy of Motion Pictures on things now. So my background is really pretty well steeped in entertainment. I was just sort of mentioning to you before that, it's so fascinating to me now that the corporate clients who've been coming to us because of our entertainment background, because we know how to tell stories, because we know how to move audiences and make emotional connections, because they're all now in the content creation business, because they're all looking to create experiences. So I think that's really the first thing we do with corporate clients is whether, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this too, but people may be attracted by the work, but there's a certain amount of mess and a certain lot of risk-taking that it takes to get to the good work. And there are some people who just don't have tolerance for that. It doesn't make them bad people. It doesn't make them bad organizations. But we actually have I'll give you a little hint. We have actually 5 questions we ask ourselves whenever we're trying to determine whether there's somebody we want to work with. First of all, is there a great story to be told? Because if there's no great story, we really can't do what we do. The second thing is, do the people that we're dealing with understand the value of what we can bring with soundtracks? In other words, how much education do we need to do in that? How much do they really get, what we can do if we're working collaboratively? We're big collaborative. We're very much a collaborative art form, I think, in all of our disciplines, but I think music and sound probably even more so. Third thing, obviously, is can they pay the freight? There are certain clients we'd love to work with who just budgets are very, very tight. And that, by the way, is usually not our limiting factor. It's kind of all the other questions. The fourth question for us is this work that we think is going to be exciting to our people who work at Man-Made? Because if we don't bring in great work that they're really excited about, then they get bored and they get cranky and they get upset. And then the last thing, especially in the corporate clients we have to watch out for, is making sure that the people we're talking to can move things up through the organization. We've had that problem a lot of times where we're dealing with immensely creative people with really potentially great stories, decent budgets, but they just can't move things up through the organization. So that can get really frustrating. We're creative people in a matrix kind of situation in business and technology and creativity, and we try to really be very cognizant of those questions when we're making decisions about what we're going to work on, what we're not going to work on.
Right. Jason, I want to continue with what keeps you up at night. I imagine you have funders or producers or people that are paying the bills. How do you convince them that the risk is worth it? It is not so bad as much as they think it's bad? How do I imagine that the risk is all there because you've been through it, but you've got to calm them along the way. So you have a nervous client. You have any tips or tricks?
I think for me, because the mission of Ars Nova is to support early career artists who are finding their voice, music, comedy, theater, we do all sorts of things. And so what I found in terms of fundraising or bringing people into our world is there's more explanation to do. We're an incubator, and convincing someone why they should be supporting a Lin-Manuel Miranda before he's Lin-Manuel Miranda is much more difficult. So what I've found is the buy-in takes longer, and then once people are in, they come in really hardcore once they get what we're doing. But there's a lot of contextualizing and explaining because more of what we do is developmental and behind the scenes, and the producing only speaks for some of what's happening. So we don't always have a big thing to show. Now, something like Great Comet is changing that very quickly, and the success of a Lin-Manuel Miranda, we're starting to have those kinds of stories to tell, which help us explain to people exactly what we do. Oh, you found Lin-Manuel Miranda. You found Billy Eichner in a basement and brought him in and helped him find his voice and developed his work. And now he's on my TV all the time. They sort of get that. But in the beginning years, that was very challenging. And then once people are on board and sort of get that and want to support it, they actually sort of poke at me to make sure I'm taking big risks. They get really excited about it. And I think they see enough product now that they get it, but ultimately, as philanthropists, I think they're more excited about investing in something that could be, or what I call the capital P for potential, rather than knowing their money's going into a stone in a fountain at a larger institution. So it's a different mentality, but
Great.
I think people get into it. They get into the risk.
Terrific. Marla, when you work with some famous fashion designers or photographers, do they start with a story? Is there a story or some message that they want to tell other than they want to sell clothes?
Depends. Sometimes there's a very long, complicated, heartfelt story. And sometimes there's no story. So it really runs the gamut. And my job is to fill in when there is no story, but as if it was their story. I'm sure everyone has had that experience. And then when there is a story, sometimes it's amazing and you just do it and it's beautiful and they're so thrilled and they said you bring their idea to life, and that's actually my favorite thing to do. In other cases, you have to fill in the blanks and the holes and make it coherent to whoever the audience is. So, but even in a fashion picture, something so simple as an image of a girl in a dress, with the background, you try and, more than the clothes, you try and, by everything around the person, you give them a backstory and a history, and it's not just the way they're posing, but why are they there with those particular things, and how does that make it more compelling to the customer or the people, the reader. It really, you can, just by a little prop or a type of chair or a color, you can really say a lot about a person and a brand and an image. So.
Did you ever feel like you went way too out on a tightrope with a client?
I don't know if I have. I must have blocked it out. I think that if they say no, I don't know. I think it's always worked out somehow miraculously.
All right, well, I want to continue with that thought. I'm going to ask you, before we open it up, I'm going to ask you all the exact same question. Tell me a story when everything went to hell and how you fixed it and how you recovered. Whoever wants to go first.
I guess I could start. I'm sorry.
No, you start.
There was about a year and a half ago, we were working on a very large scale project with a soundtrack with an enormous number of elements. And we probably spent 3 months strategizing about what it needed to be and understanding the audience flow and a million different things. And then probably about 6 months developing all the audio and marrying it up to all the visual imagery and everything. And we showed up to the installation and literally nothing was the same as it was on the drawings. In terms of speaker placements, in terms of where, how basically those audience flows were supposed to work, just physically were not going to work in the space because apparently a bunch of changes have been made and it never really kind of filtered to all the people creating the content for the space. So we were about 3 days before opening. And thank goodness, I mean, honestly, if this had happened 10 years ago, we would have really been in deep trouble. No one on the project slept for the last 3 days. But 10 years ago, we didn't have what we have now, which is essentially studios on our laptops. So there were basically people rethinking an entire project essentially from scratch. We had all this wonderful raw material and the basic story was staying the same, and I'm not going to tell you what the project is. So don't ask. But it was really just, at the end of the day, it really turned out quite well. And it's just, I think everyone who worked on that project, and this is actually when all goes to hell on these kinds of things, I think what we all walked away with, I'm saying we, I wasn't one of the people physically on site, but what everyone walked away with was realizing, oh, I guess we kind of know what we're doing. Like even this kind of situation, we can end up redesigning something on the fly. Certainly not an ideal scenario, but I think that's what we always try to do now is when you get into those situations where all hell breaks loose, to try to figure out, well, what can we learn, but also what was reaffirmed about, oh, well, this is why we do things this way. This is why we're organized in this way. This is why we take all the time to kind of map all these things out. So when all hell does break loose, it isn't just a big shrug. We really can backtrack and kind of take forward the steps. And I'm sure you guys are in the same boat with a lot of things you do, but it's that right-left brain sort of thing. We need to be intensely creative, but we also need to be intensely focused on process and organization and thinking about audience and thinking about what happens when we go to the installation, do all those kinds of things. But I think it reminded us why we put all the time and effort and energy into that.
Great, thank you. Jason?
I'm going to use Marla's earlier comment. I think I've blocked them out. I can think of, there are times where I've had to fire a full band after the first performance or things like that, but that doesn't feel epic. I think the thing that came to mind, well, it's just have to do it.
Epic.
The director was hiding in the bathroom, so it was up to me. The thing that came to mind is just, I think because my job is really to nurture these young artists' minds, designers, performers, writers, directors, to sort of help them find their voice and hone it. And so sometimes I feel like in an effort to help them make the thing they're trying to make or take the biggest risks they can take, we end up down a road that's not quite as grand as the impulse was or the idea started as. And so reconciling that feeling of this really isn't as great as it could be, but in some cases it's very much what the artist wants or feels good about. But as an outside eye, you feel like this really could have gone better. And that can sometimes feel disastrous in my own artistic mind.
Great. Marla?
Okay, well, because I had a little time while they were telling their stories, I thought of about 6 things. But it always
The blocks is dropped.
The blocks are dropping.
Stop blocking things out. It's a little dangerous.
It's true. I mean, the first one was like a FedEx disaster when I was doing a Madonna set in LA, where we had built the whole set in New York, which was gorgeous furniture and fabric and all these things. And it was many years ago. And the FedEx, they didn't come. So I just remember being in the studio on the phone, like screaming and crying, like, this is Madonna, this is for Vanity Fair, you don't understand, I need my things. And it did show up, but it was a snowstorm and a bunch of things, and that was maybe 15 years ago. But I think now, and I think even with the job we did together, the hologram, we called her Mother Goat, there was a lot of technical last-minute issues with that piece in Korea at the Olympic Stadium, like everyone trying to figure it out. And that's the hard part for me because we work with, so many people who know their technical programming and skills like that. And it's like there's nothing I can do. If it's not working, I can't go in there and repaint it or fix it like I could on some other thing. So I'd say that got saved last minute. And even on the Grammy performance, we, with Gaga, we did a David Bowie tribute, and Intel was a sponsor. So we had designed a robotic piano. We had some 3D projections. And again, because they're live performances, you don't always have a chance to work them out in the conditions, especially on the Grammys. They give you like literally 2 seconds on the stage in the exact conditions. And if it doesn't work, you don't have time to tech it out. So there were some hairy moments. I mean, fortunately, those worked out. But, I had a few knots in my stomach. I think, all of us have had those moments. And again, you always have to have a plan B or C. Like, if it doesn't work, what's going to work that still will not be horrible? So.
Yeah.
You don't get a second chance in a live broadcast, do you?
No, I hate a live. I hate a live broadcast because especially with the other things I do, like photo shoots and commercials and film, you can do 100 takes and then they retouch it. and then they pick the best one, and then they do CGI, so it doesn't matter. But
Yeah, I last time I saw you, I think we saw each other at your studio, near your studio, and we were talking about a job you were on, and you said, yeah, we're doing it, prepping it today and shooting it tomorrow. I said, oh, great, how long have you been working on it? Oh, we got the job yesterday. And it was like, it's a total different time frame than I think what a lot of us in the attraction business, it's years and years for some things, and you're doing things like you get a job and the next day you're designing and shooting. And
right. Well, you think fast. I mean, what we do doesn't have to last as long as what you do, but every time I do get a chance to do something with more longevity, like an interior or an exhibit or something, I'm so grateful for that I get to really think about something and not just use materials that we can get on Amazon Prime tomorrow. And it's a nice skill to be able to do it quickly, but I do enjoy really putting time and thought into the occasional project where we have more time.
Great, thanks. I would like to open it up now, questions from the audience for either Jason, Joel, or Marla, if you please, and I will wait for somebody with a microphone. Oh, here we go.
Suspense.
Is it on? Hi. Jason, this is Lynn Bond. You and I have met before, but I have a question specifically about Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. So you guys have been talking about design here, and I know Catherine earlier was talking a lot about the human element. So there's actually a trend that started happening more in theater recently, and it is also happening in Natasha Pierre that is definitely, I think, part of the storytelling, and that's the use of actor-musicians. And I'm wondering if you could sort of talk about the risk involved with that when you go from doing a show with actor-musicians in a 99-seat theater to doing it in a Broadway house where the level of live entertainment is raised even more because it's a bigger space, it's a bigger audience, all of that. And you have professional actors who may not be at the same caliber of musicianship as the professional musicians on Broadway.
It was a challenge even in the 99-seat theater to find that balance. But Dave Malloy, who wrote the piece, always imagined it happening that way and with actor performers. And we actually cast with that in mind from the beginning. So we were not drawing from the normal pool of musical theater-y people. It was more downtown performers and people with strange backgrounds who did weird things. And Taylor Mack was in the original workshop. But it's the most challenging thing about the actor musicians was not their ability as much as how the sound design needed to work. Which has its own challenges in the large space, but in Ars Nova, we still wanted to create a room where sound was coming from at least close to where someone was standing, but that you could also hear that person across the room. So finding that balance was super tricky and a very stressful tech and preview time because the sound designer and the sound team had so much to figure out before they could even begin to take notes, which was very stressful as a producer. But the musician actors, I think Dave, because we were creating a piece from scratch, he was able to really write toward people's strengths, and now replicating that becomes the challenge of, but then we brought in Josh Groban, who's starring in the show on Broadway, and he was so excited to learn how to play accordion. And so, but as the show has expanded, we've also found ways to double. So there's an actor-musician who covers percussion and drums in the show, but now there's also a drummer. So when he gets up and goes other places, we don't lose the ability to have percussion in the show. So we've sort of been able to double and cover in ways that we didn't need to at Ars Nova. There are 3 or 4 guitars, but the actors who are playing guitar aren't really covering lead guitar most of the time. But it is still working the same way that it did in the Ars Nova space. There's no orchestra pit or orchestra or backstage musicians.
It's so interesting because the way you're talking about this just sort of reminded me that a lot of times it's easy to get scared of risk, but the fact is not taking a risk is actually often a much bigger risk. You know, what if you tried to duplicate that show from the 99-seat theater where you are now, and you wanted to just play it safe on stuff? It just wouldn't work, would it?
I mean, it's so funny that Comet happens to be happening now, so it's become the thing I'm talking about for this entire panel, but it was the biggest risk Ars Nova has ever taken. We actually combined all of our production money for an entire season into being able to make that show. And when Mimi Lien, who's the scenic designer, brought me her set design, I was like, my jaw dropped to the floor. I had never seen something so inventive and beautiful, and we could not afford that set. And I sort of brought my whole team in and said, we have to find a way to make this. And in the meantime, Mimi and Rachel Chapkin, the director, had gone off to, you know, try to revise a design that we could do. And they came back with something that looked like a cheap Joe's Pub. And I thought, we can't do this. We have to find a way to make this design. So we took more risks and figured out how to make it happen. And literally, I was calling every theater I could think of, asking if I could borrow chairs. And it was kind of ridiculous. But the whole show, beyond the design, the whole show itself was such a big risk for Ars Nova to take in many ways. And people now that this has happened, people say, wow, it must make you want to make more commercial theater. And I laugh because it doesn't seem commercial to me still, but also because no, it actually makes me want to take more huge risks because the reward can be so great. And then tangentially, I'm sorry I'm taking up so much time, but tangentially, I think my selection of artists in general and the projects I'm drawn to and projects I work on, because our mission is about supporting emerging artists, that's just so broad. I had to start to find metrics for how I was choosing things. And so I sort of made an internal decision to look for people who were taking huge risks, or the people I call the unicorns, who have a great deal of P for potential, but aren't necessarily making traditional work or aren't coming at it in a traditional way. So the stuff we're doing is a little left of center, accessible to the mainstream, but there really is huge risk-taking and everything going on there, because I feel like there's so much opportunity for everyone else that exists all over the city, at least in the theatrical landscape. So why not be the place that's, you know, just going out on a limb and taking big chances?
Thank you. Thank you. Somebody else? No? Yes? If not?
There's one.
Oh, there's one.
Hello. So kind of continuing on what you were just talking about in choosing people who are willing to take those risks and who have the P for potential, how do you build a team that's going to be willing to take those strategic risks and build a group that will support you if you go out on a huge limb? Because if you don't have that sort of support structure, then you're much more likely to fail. So what do you look for when you're picking people and putting a team together?
Is that to me?
For anybody.
Okay. Someone else want to?
I mean, just if you don't mind to jump in, maybe you can jump in too. But it's really a great question. And I think, especially in music and sound, a lot of people kind of have this romantic notion that there's a composer somewhere. And look, in film, you know, there still are a finite number of people who kind of are chief cook and bottle washer and do everything themselves, but that doesn't really exist quite as much as it used to. But sound designers or composers often in a back room and kind of just, you know, in a mad rush doing everything themselves. And the reality is, because of production deadlines, because of the complexity of work now, because of the multimedia components that go in and how things all have to get integrated, it does take a team. And I think it's just an excellent question, because you know, I think it starts by attracting people who are risk takers. And I think a big thing is also, and I'll be honest, we weren't always good at this, and I think we're getting better, and I think we could still get a little bit better, but you have to reward people for risk taking and not have them feel like they're going to get punished if something goes wrong, because those two things are antithetical. And you know, you were also talking about a plan B, a plan C on things. I think you start to develop a little bit of an idea when you are out on a limb live. You guys were talking about live, and it just reminded me of, we worked on Million Second Quiz for NBC, which I don't know if everyone remembers that show. It was a short-lived show on NBC, but it was a mammoth risk because there were literally hundreds of music and sound cues in 1 hour of network television that was live on a rooftop in New York City, and everything had to fire off from computer components, and there was a music room, and they were kind of changing the show as like every night it was different because they were still trying to figure it out. And we were writing music and integrating things and trying to get things done in a test situation. And so we had 5 sound designers, 3 composers, 2 different producers on the live show. We were also running at the same time a game for Million Second Quiz on the web simultaneously that had a team of 3 other people. And then there were software people, and then there were other companies that we didn't even have any control of, who were the game control companies and the visual graphics people. And it's, I think you have to find the right people who are willing to, and kind of excited by those sort of risks. And I think the main thing is, like I was saying, is to reward them for taking risks, not punish them if things don't work out. And I think the other thing is just building a camaraderie amongst your team and the other teams that are there. Honestly, we take everybody out for beers and have social time, because when you get to know people, you're kind of less likely to throw other people under the bus. And it just takes one throwing under the bus to bust up a team like that. But I think that's a really great question. I'm curious, because you must have a lot of people working on your project.
Yes, I have a few things to say about that. I think that when you're brainstorming and starting an early stage, it's great to have people who love to take risks and who support you, and who, I guess I've worked with a lot of the same people for over the years, so we have a secret language and we push each other and we fill in the blanks, like someone's stronger at certain things, I'm stronger at other things. But there are certain people on my team that I actually don't like them to take risks. Like the people really responsible for the building and getting it there. Like if there is like a questionable technique, I'd like them to experiment with the time they have and present the options. But I feel that, you need the risk takers and then the not risk takers in any project. But yeah, you do want people who are creative and who don't really want to just repeat the same thing. That's why we are always reinventing everything and starting from scratch. So it's just building the trust, like you said.
Great, thank you. I need to wrap it up right now, but I wanted to really thank 3 very incredible designers who took time out. I know, Jason, you just came from the theater. I know, Marla, you just came from the studio. And Joel, I don't know.
I was hanging up here today.
Thank you all very much for taking the time out of your very busy schedules. And we're very excited that you could spend a little bit of time with us. Thank you.
Thank you.